The horror genre mainly relies on deception and scares. Unfortunately, the horror genre nowadays relies too much on jump scares, taking their good old time, or grossing you out. We all are familiar with the Saw and Paranormal Activity films, but the first of the horror film series of the new millennium was Final Destination. Final Destination had a complex but genius idea. Unlike Jason, Michael Myers, or some monster you can physically fight, the killer in these movies is death itself. Final Destination came out in 2000. It's about when a group of high schoolers are about to go on a flight to Paris. But then Alex, played by Devin Swa, has a premonition that the plane is going to explode and crash. When he and some other people are removed from the plane, his premonition comes true. But as time goes by, each of the passengers that were supposed to die on the plane starts dying one by one in mysterious ways. They then figure out that death itself is killing them off because they're not supposed to be alive, and they're supposed to die. This was a decent start to the film series. I like how as each of the people die, the FBI keeps questioning Alex even more, so at least this film had some common sense about what would happen in the real world. But my biggest problem with this movie is that there are not many kills compared to the other films, and that it could have been paced better. The first death is simple but very effective, but the one death that's sort of over the top is the one with the teacher. She gets shards of glass from a computer screen that explodes to her throat, a knife falls and goes through her chest, and then her house explodes. Overall, not the best of the series, but a decent start. On a side note, Shane William Scott, who was in American Pie just before this film, plays one of the supporting characters. Finally, that score by Shirley Walker, who you might know from being one of the top composers from Batman the Animated Series, is brilliantly eerie. I give Final Destination 2.5 stars out of 4. Final Destination 2 came out 3 years later. It had the same basic plot premise where Kimberly, played by AJ Cook, has premonition that a traffic pileup is going to happen. At first you might think it's a typical sequel that repeats the same story from the last film, but Final Destination 2 is one of those rare sequels that is better than its predecessor because they expanded on the idea of the first film and improved on it. The two things were 1. More creative deaths, and 2. Better character development. Unlike the first one where the characters didn't do much to help each other out, this time all the characters, well the ones that are still alive, work together to try to stay alive and figure out a plan. I like this because you get more attached to the characters, and it's more drastic when they die. The only cast members who return from the previous film are Claire, played by Ali Lartner, and Mr. Bloodworth, played by Tony Todd, as they help the people who are supposed to die. The deaths this time are more creative and they keep you guessing throughout. The traffic pileup scene is great in its own right and definitely one of the best moments in the series. The visuals are a little bit outdated and the directing could have been better, but it had the only ending of the whole film series I liked, and it's my final reason why it's my favorite of the whole film series. Overall, I give Final Destination 2 3 stars out of 4. Final Destination 3 came out another 3 years later, and it was the last of the films to be directed by James Wong and last to be composed by Shirley Walker. The movie is about when Wendy, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, has a premonition before an accident on a roller coaster, and you know the rest from there. The film sort of follows more of the same pattern from the first film, by having most survivors separated, but it dwarfs it by having a lot more kills. My favorite death scene is the one in the weight room. There's so many possibilities they could have gone with, and the tension is high because you're wondering how this guy's gonna die.
What I tell you, Kevin, huh? Fuck that! I just win! That's all I know how to do, Kevin! Baby, I just win!
I know that I shouldn't laugh, but this guy would have been alive if he wasn't so prideful. I like how they use pictures from Wendy's camera as clues to how the survivors are gonna die. The visuals, again, are a mixed bag, but it did deliver on the eerie music by Shirley Walker. I liked Wendy's character, and I wanted to see her live throughout the movie. It's interesting to know that this is the only leading character in the Final Destination films to have a more noticeable film career after this one. The movie gained controversy because it showed a picture from 9/11 about being an example of a premonition kind of death. Originally, the movie was supposed to end at the 4th of July celebration, but test screen audiences didn't like that because they thought the movie ended too soon, so they reshooted for a better fitting ending, but an ending that I didn't like overall, and the alternate ending is worse in my opinion. A good film in general, but the second one is still the best. I give Final Destination 3 3 stars out of 4. The Final Destination came out another 3 years later. Unfortunately, Shirley Walker passed away by this point, and was replaced by Brian Tyler. The film follows the same pattern where this time Nick, played by Bobby Campo, has a premonition about a horrible accident at Speedway. The Final Destination is easily the worst of the film series and a terrible movie by itself. The premonitions don't make any sense. If Nick has these premonitions before someone's gonna die, does that mean that death wants to be stopped? The characters in this film are some of the most uninteresting characters that you'll see in any movie. Unlike the previous films where they developed these characters a little so their deaths would be more drastic, this film doesn't even bother to give you a hint of what these characters' backstories are. I don't know what was worse, the deaths or the terrible acting.
I've got my eye on you two.
Even though this film cost more than the previous Final Destination films, it had the most obvious CGI and is a tragedy in itself. Most of the deaths are not that interesting, and the whole film itself has a direct-to-video quality to it. Brian Tyler's score is interesting, but is immature compared to Shirley Walker's. Lastly, why is it called The Final Destination? Is it too hard to just call it Final Destination 4? Easily the worst of the films, and the one I least recommend. I give The Final Destination 1 star out of 4. The first Final Destination film to come out in less than 3 years later was Final Destination 5. It's a nitpick of mine to number a movie that's technically a prequel. The movie takes place before the events of the first movie. It's about when Sam, played by Nicholas DeGusto, has a premonition that the bridge is going to collapse. After it happens, death comes for the survivors. Final Destination 5 went back to the basics of the earlier films and sort of expanded upon it. I like the whole idea that the people who are hunted by death can have the years of someone else if they killed them. The deaths were more creative this time around, and they kept you guessing what was going to happen like they should. The bridge collapse scene is amazing to say the least, and a showstopper. Not to mention the CGI is a drastic improvement over the previous film's crappy CGI. But I feel like the movie could have been a little bit longer. Also, the way that the gymnastic girl died was not realistic because her leg wouldn't snap like that. Again, I didn't like the ending. Overall, the Final Destination films are interesting films in their own right because they can be creative and suspenseful. There might be a Final Destination 6 and 7, but at least that sounds better than the Fast and the Furious 6 and 7. Not as good as the second or third movie, but better than the first and fourth movie. I give Final Destination 5 2.5 stars out of 4.